So hello and thank you for coming, everybody. It's wonderful to see such a full room on such an important topic. To give you a rough idea how this panel came about and what its context is in the wider Stockholm Internet Forum, there have been a lot of debates over the last, must have been 2 or 3 years now, about the extent to which we can create appropriate conditions for not just, everybody says, oh, internet's a human right here, or cybersecurity is important there, or whatever, but what actually that then means in a specific local or regional context, and to try and build principles for that in some way, which are either technical, political, or indeed economic. There have been several policy papers written on this topic. One of them I wrote for the European Parliament, which is probably why I've been sat here as moderator, because they assumed I had something to say. I'm not sure why that's the case, but anyway. And then separately, there's been developments with global partners and other organizations who've developed issues on this. We're specifically focusing today on a subset of that, so it's not the whole broad question of all economic, political, and technical aspects that we'll be looking at about the internet we hope to create, the internet we're trying to envisage, but a very specific subset around secure and open communication. And I think we have a wonderful set of panelists here, which I'm very forward to listening to in greater detail and seeing what the opinions are on how we can create the right conditions. So starting very far on the left, we have Maroun Habib, who's the head of cybersecurity at Potec Consulting for Lebanon. Yes, of course. To his right, I need to make sure I get the title correct, is Ambassador Theodor H. Winkler, the director of the DCAF. To his right, we have Stephanie Hankey, co-founder and director of Tactical Tech. To his right, we have, again, I need to make sure I get all of the names right. Arturo Campo, who's a consultant working in this area. And to his right, we have Eduardo Bertoni from CELE in Argentina, working on many of the policy issues relevant to this space. So, wonderful panel, all looking at different shades and different aspects of security. And I mean, we've heard lots of things about cybersecurity in the last days, but I'd like to start with Eduardo and going into a little bit more specifics. What for you is cybersecurity? How do you conceive of it in the context of this workshop?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me in this panel. Is this working? Yeah. Not working?
We only have you in the panel if we don't turn on your microphone. One doesn't work.
Hello? It's working now? No? I can use this. Okay.
Fantastic.
It's some sort of cyber censorship, but it's okay.
Starts early.
No, well, thanks again for having me in this panel. I would like to make my first shot to this panel by reading. I know that we are not going to do formal presentation, but I would like to read a couple of very, very short paragraphs that were written by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And then from there to drop my idea. An old report says, cybersecurity is one of the dimensions of human security and therefore of human development, and is linked to the interrelated presence of multiple actors, conditions, and factors. Cybersecurity is undermined whenever states fail to protect their population from crime and social violence, signaling a breakdown in the relationship between those governing and the governed. Cybersecurity must be regarded as a public policy, understood as the guidelines of courses of action established by the authorities to achieve an objective and that serve to create or transform the conditions in which individuals or groups in society carry out their activities. A public policy cannot be fully understood without establishing a nexus to human rights. The purpose of public policy is to ensure that these rights are respected in law and in practice, and the conduct of state institutions and agents. The interesting thing, my friends, is that this was not a report on cybersecurity. That was a report on citizen security. Using the browser, I changed the word citizen with the word cyber. And I read these two paragraphs, and for me, and I hope that for you as well, has a lot of sense. My point here is a simple point and a clear point. Cybersecurity as citizen security is part of human security. We should not reinvent the wheel. If it is part of human security, human rights, standard human rights, respect should be part of any public policy regarding cybersecurity. In the same way that international bodies protecting human rights said that citizen security, for example, should respect in the implementation human rights. Of course, and I finish with this, of course, this could trigger a broader debate, a debate about the content and the concept of cybersecurity. Some people think that cybersecurity is just related to the protection of the individuals and their rights. Some other people think that cybersecurity is more related to the protection of the state for external threats. I understand that this could be, an interesting discussion, but for me, coming from the human rights fields and freedom of expression field for many years, having in mind this idea that cybersecurity is part of human security is essential for the development of any public policy.
Fantastic, thank you. Teddy, would you say that you agree with that?
Well, yes, it works. I fully agree with this. Let me, however, add perhaps for the sake of our debate a broader picture. Cybersecurity is used in a very loose form. It may be valuable to make a definitory approach. First, it can be state security, cyber war. I mean, it's war, troops moving around, tanks, aircraft bomb, and you use also cyber. So that is state security or interstate security at the forefront. Questions that arise in this context are, can one limit the use of cyber? For instance, can one make sure that the Geneva Conventions are applied to the use of cyber?
Do you think that's possible?
Yes.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, one needs to define what this means in practical terms. There are several Geneva Conventions, and certain targets like hospitals also should be exempt. It's not so easy in the case of cyber as it is with an aircraft bombing, but there is a road for that. Confidence building measures belong to the same chapter. Arms control approaches, that's cyber war. Then cyber security in the sense of human security, in a broader sense with cyber criminality, vandalism, and the related question, where criminals or terrorists or vandals or the state interfere with the wealth or the rights of people. And then thirdly, that's, for instance, the world of the Budapest Convention and that sort of thing. And thirdly, we have governance issues, actually a multitude of governance issues. Who should be on the state side responsible for cyber? The cyber ministry, the defense ministry, police. This is a question. Which parliamentary committee? What's the responsibility of internet providers? There is a whole host of questions there. So there are three questions: cyber war, cyber crime, and governance issues.
Then I'd like to jump in with a very concrete example from Maroon from Lebanon. How does that work in your specific context? I mean, we've heard there's lots of different people who can be responsible. How does it actually work on the ground?
Okay, so before starting to talk about Lebanon, I'm going to talk about the developing countries, about the issues about it. First of all, the developing countries are missing regulations and law in order to govern the cyberspace. The second part of it is they have a poor, let's say, security hygiene, or let's say security awareness, was it on the corporate level or was it on the personal level, which later on they might integrate. You might use on the corporate level, you use a lot of personal security and privacy. And the third point will be about the ISP's transparency. Usually, politics, usually in a lot of developing countries, you have a lot of corruption inside of them. So you have the politics are always integrated and try to manipulate what ISPs do. Additionally, the ISPs lack of, they do not provide, let's say, data retention policy and privacy policy. At least they are not, they didn't publish it yet. And even if they published it, consumers do not know about them. The third problem that developing countries have is they are resellers of the services. They are always dragged behind, let's say, the West, who are always developing the technology. So, and they are also, most of the time, they are late. Additionally, at some places, you have when you import some security services or equipment from the West, they do not always comply with your needs that you need. For example, in some countries, they integrated, they started using mobile banking without even having e-banking or ATM reach some places. So mobile banking was the first to come into the sector. What do we have more?
Can I just ask what that means from a sort of from a development perspective? So you're saying essentially that the needs of southern countries aren't being met by both by markets and also by
actually, because they are not industrial countries, they are buying the equipment. So you have a lot of overhead on the price and let's say technical consumption, let's say, using those devices. And what do you have more maybe?
Just to be clear, while you gather your thoughts, this is an open workshop at all times, so any questions from the audience, you're welcome to straight away jump in, disagree, bring a different point, or push the discussion in a different direction if you please. We have a microphone for you, 1 second.
Okay. Well, thank you. It makes it's really it's okay. It makes life easier. I'm a member of the Committee of Experts on the Rights of Internet Users, Council of Europe. I must kiss it. Okay, thank you. The question to the panelists is, don't you think there is an insurmountable contradiction in principle terms between secrecy, between security and openness and transparency in internet? Because we talk at large.
Can I ask just briefly what the contradiction is? Because you mentioned 4 things.
No,
what's contradicting
that's the question to you.
But what's contradicting what? So secrecy, security, privacy, and transparency?
Secrecy and openness go hand in hand?
Secrecy and openness. Can that go hand in hand?
Just a second. We worked in the Council of Europe, and it was adopted already, a very important documents on search engines. And we introduced a retainment period of private data for 6 months. Mm-hmm. But as a result of bureaucratical processing, we got so many if and buts that it was devalued, as a matter of fact, that 6 months period. So I'm an optimist concerning solving this problem, but I know my optimism is unfounded. So
I'm still trying to work out what the question is. That's why I'm asking.
How about your optimism? How can we solve this objective contradiction?
The objective contradiction between open
privacy, secrecy, because we have everything on the internet, and transparency, and our desire for transparency and openness.
Please, if you feel able to answer that.
I mean, obviously that's the tricky one, and I think that there is only one way to address the problem, is the principle of proportionality. And at the end, proportional things, balance, requires values. And if your values set in that, and you believe that a club of 25 people have the possibility to monitor the world and control everything and don't tell anyone what it's doing, if that the type of values are there, you might say, well, listen, privacy has no future. But your values are that, that we can take the risk of giving people choice and freedom and opportunity to discuss and talk about things in the internet openly. Then proportionality says that the internet should be largely open and transparent. So I think that the question, to answer that question, we say is what kind of society we want to build, and I want to link with other things. What kind of internet we want to build? What kind of world we want to build? It's going to be a world controlled by 2-3 superpowers and companies or countries or security agencies that decide our future, or companies that read our email and sell us products. Is that the kind of world we want to build? Or we're going to build a world where we don't even know what world is that one. The other world that we're trying to invent that seems that we cannot invent because someone has decided that they're going to invent a world for us. And if the solution is that we go for the second, we want to open this internet, we have to think from the other point of view, is what is the infrastructure? What is the real asset in the internet? And that's the people. And if you don't put the people in the center of this equation, you were talking about human rights. If we don't start by saying that the most important asset of the internet are not the computers and the wires and the cables and the fibers and the GSM and the mobile phones, and we are all connected, that the most important asset are the people and the safety of the people, we cannot build infrastructure. So let's talk about what people actually need in the world. And today, what people need in the world is the possibility to talk and the possibility not to be prosecuted because you talk, the possibility to talk about what is wrong, to scream what is wrong, and not to be deported. And this is a value, right? The value of, and then we talk about the internet. And I think the internet, when we get that clear between us, then we can build any infrastructure you want. I'm very technical. You know, tell me what value you want to preserve, at which technology we can put. But if we look at things from the technology point of view, we're going to end up with this club of people monitoring everything. I mean, that's my answer.
Steph, perhaps you could jump in there because I believe you have a lot to say about capacity building in those specific areas, especially around users.
Yeah, I mean, just as an extension of what Arturo is saying, I mean, I think the internet's an extension of the public domain in general, and so any of the political questions about freedom of expression just move onto the internet. It's not a separate space in those terms. And I think one of the interesting questions is also about the term cybersecurity. So the work that we do at Tactical Tech is basically focused on training and doing capacity building for civil society. And so when we talk about cybersecurity, there's a kind of, it sounds like a linguistic tick, but at the same time, one of the problems we have with that is that one of the biggest challenges we see for activists is not just the technical challenges of the infrastructure, but actually the risks around data. And so data security might be perhaps a better term to be using in some of these instances. It's important what's happening on the internet and the infrastructure, but of course it's the movement of the data which is actually in the hands of companies, which is one of the big issues. And perhaps that may be a better way to think about tying this into some of the policy discussions we've been having. It's not just a governance issue, but also what are the companies doing, what are the commercial environment, what's the commercial environment doing that drives these openness and vulnerabilities for activists.
If I may go to your good and excellent point, I mean, if we put the thing between secrecy and openness, obviously it's a contradiction. It's a contradiction per se, secrecy and openness. However, I think that this is something that is, it's not new, and I think that you are more focusing your point on some sort of, for example, criminal investigations, okay? And it is pretty obvious that at some point of a criminal investigation, do the investigation under secrecy rules, is okay. We should say that. The problem is the proportionality. The problem is to have some sort of judicial control. The problem is that if you are implementing data retention, you should request the data retention to a judge, have the data retention for a specific period of time, have probable cause to do this for specific individuals. So, and not for a period of time that is not limited. So, I mean, I think that you can combine these ideas of investigations, good investigations, but as I said at the beginning, this is part of human security. We need to pay attention to the protection of human rights and the protection of human rights of everybody, and due process, respect of human rights guarantees, and even the privacy it should be part of this of these kind of policies. So I see your I'm glad that you're optimistic, but and I see your point, and I think that you can work with these two things together.
Then I'd like to come back to something Arturo mentioned beforehand. If we give you the right norms, then you can tell us the technologies we need to use for it. So taking from some of the things that Eduardo was just saying, what are the technologies we need to build that kind of internet?
I mean, I think the basic principle, I always like to say what are the technical principles. I think whatever we build has to allow everyone to watch everyone. Everything we build means that you have to give the same powers to the citizen that the superpowers the NSA or a security agency has. So if I cannot ask you what you know about me, and we don't have that process of balancing, we cannot build anything. I believe that anything that relates to peer-to-peer in general is better than centralized services. I mean, as a whole bold statement, I believe that everything that has no a center is much better. I think it's much better a society with multiple centers. It's much better a society that does not concentrate. It's a society that is in the edges. I believe information should be distributed. I believe information should be concentrated in the cloud, owned by 2 or 3 companies. I believe that the less control I have about things, or less control we have about things, is the more control we have about things. And in the sense that, that there is not an owner. It's the community is the owner. And if we move for other technically efficient models, when we look into the markets and we get the opposite, right? When you remove privacy into this equation, you get the totally opposite model. Let's concentrate all together. Let's everyone use 3 tools in the world, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and you name it, 5 or more. Let's get the whole planet to use 5 tools. Let's reduce the richness of the choice to 5 things. Let's concentrate all together. Let's make everyone equal, and then market booms. But this is not necessarily what people need. At least I believe that's not what we need. We need diversity. We need to have 100 mail servers. We don't need to have Gmail as mail server. We need to have 20,000 different companies running mails like it was at the beginning. It seems that we're reverting back, right? We're concentrating back. The internet started, as many people doing things, and now we have basically 3 companies running the show.
Please, you want to jump in?
Yeah, a point which I think is merits to be made is to come back to a statement that we heard a number of times during this conference, namely that the next billion of internet users will come from the global south. Now, if we compare the perspectives of that billion with those of the first billion, there is a reason for concern. Essentially, most of the issues we discuss in this conference are about governance. And the global south reality is more often than not that governance is a weak point. These are fragile governments, vulnerable governments, resource-poor governments within vulnerable or occasionally hostile environments, with a poor record of deep regional cooperation. They have no voice. To give you an example, I'm coming from Switzerland. Banks in my country find it difficult to cope with the problems posed by the internet because bank robbers occasionally come these days with a gun into the main counter and ask for money, but more often they come through the internet. And there is no clear answer how the banking sector should react. In real life, they write this money, these losses off. But this is a no long-term perspective because this means that you can do bank robbery without being punished, so it will attract people.
So it's a long-term lack of
Honestly,
capacity.
I'm more concerned about how people delete their personal data from Facebook than bank robbers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more concerned about how you wipe your digital traces in this internet of today that someone steals my bank account. Because I'm lucky enough that I have not much money, so well, basically I can actually make more money. But actually, how do I actually fix the theft of the data? How people that have been fighting for causes are watermarked and fingerprint globally. What is the button I have to press to disappear from the internet? For me, this is a strong concern because most of this global south, these 1 billion people, live under conditions where this is a must to survive. Because most of these people are fighting for rights. Most of these people are fighting for democracies, women's rights, gender rights, sexual rights, menstrual rights. And the infrastructure we have built today does not allow them to You know, they are fully traceable, fully identifiable, etc. So, although I understand the market perspective, bank sector, cybercrime, child pornography, and all these big agenda topics, I believe that the right to remain anonymous, the right to remain untraceable, and the right to delete data from large infrastructure is something that has to be addressed. It's a very concrete proposal. We have to be able to delete our data from Facebook, Gmail, and all the 1,000 companies out there. And that button does not exist today, and technically simple to implement. I don't think it's so complicated, just basically there's no political will to do it.
Steph, when you're working with users, what's your impression? What do users actually want when they ask for security?
I think one of the problems is that this is not just a technical problem, and users are making technical choices all the time without understanding the risks that they're taking. So, I mean, obviously specifically because we work with high-risk users, mostly with activists and journalists, and they do take risks, but when they kind of start working in the digital realm or start using technology to engage in political issues, they don't know what risks they're taking, and that's one of the problems. I think this is a difficult balance, though. I mean, when you talk about rights and freedom of expression, then you need to put things in place to look at how do you make safe spaces for people, and then this is a very, very difficult trap that you immediately fall into of closing down spaces as well. The reason why I'm saying it's not just a technical problem is you need these kinds of solutions in place and so on, but the threat very, very quickly moves from a technical threat to a personal or physical threat when you're an activist or a journalist. So these things can't really be separated. At the same time, even when you train people about technology, it's really, you know, behavior or kind of human habits in our technology use that are one of the biggest risks. It's the decisions people make about what information they give out, who they give information to, you know, who's in the video that they filmed or who's in the data that they've collected that's the issue. And these are personal decisions that people make. They're not technical choices that they make. So when we talk about building capacity, very often, you know, we're actually looking beyond technical questions, beyond sitting people down behind a computer. And what we're doing is saying, what decisions are you making? You know, what are you doing in your work? And how do you actually make decisions about this in a correct way?
Yeah, I would like to go back to something that you said, and particularly you didn't frame under the name "right to be forgotten" or something like that, but this is exactly what you are talking about. I have a lot of concerns about the right to be forgotten, because you correctly said something about the users, that the users should have the right to delete in one click all his or her personal data, but user is not only me and having the possibility to delete my data, user is also you, that you should have the possibility to know something about me sometimes. So when we are talking about the right to be forgotten, my concern is what that exactly means. That means that I would have the right to delete everything what have been said about me, for example, in the media. Are we saying that the right to be forgotten is going to delete all the information that it is in databases, for example, in media outlets about a corrupt politician, that the politician can say, okay, I need the one click to delete everything of what I have been said about me? There are a lot of cases that you can say, well, I want to delete that because after those allegations, a judge said that I was innocent. And that's okay. And you have the right as a user to know that at some point you were indicted and at some point you were free. So I'm a little, not a little, I have a lot of concerns about the idea to right to be forgotten because it can collide with freedom of expression, with access to information. And if we move forward to this right, I think that we need to think twice the consequences of implementing this.
Let me not to answer your concern, because probably it's not going to be a clear agreement, but I think that I'm also concerned actually about the information that I know they know about me. I'm more concerned about invisible traces. It basically says, do you have the right to delete an article for a newspaper that says I'm a very corrupted person? At least, you know, the game is on, you know, everyone knows what the game is about. I'm more concerned about the principle of not being informed. This is one of the legal terms, right? You're not informed about who knows what and for what purpose and how this is going to be used. Do you have the right to go to an organization, a security service, and tell them, listen, you've been monitoring my calls and watching my calls. How have you been doing that? I'm sorry, we cannot tell you. So not to get that discussion started because it's a difficult one, right? should have the bad people the right to disappear from the internet? Well, let's define what bad people is. But in order not to answer the question, I'd rather say, like, let's at least have the basic principle of the right to be informed in place. And with that, we make a tremendous progress, because if you are informed, then basically we can make the next step saying and discuss what you have the rights to be deleted and what rights has not to be deleted. But because we don't have the basic principle that we don't know what is going on, we don't know if our mobile phones today are using any encryption at all. We don't even know if this base station is enable any encryption system. We don't even know if our mail is, is on the clear or it's not. We don't know basically anything of the basic communication tools that we're using. And we are not properly informed, and not talking about abuse, just basically informed about those things.
I believe we have some questions on Twitter on this point.
Yeah, I mean, this question about personal data is quite interesting. It seems to awake a couple of comments or discussions on Twitter. And one of them is, I mean, the dealing of personal data as something that could be made for profit is really interesting. Wired had an article yesterday about some ISP that is actually using as a business scheme to sell personal data, which then makes us as the internet users to be suffering from being a part of a one-stop shop for personal data, which could be interesting.
Are there any specific opinions on that within the panel? Please, Steph.
Well, just directly, I mean, connecting the two thoughts, I think that as technology gets easier to use, it also gets harder to control. So all of us, I think, find the situation where our tools get easier, our devices get easier to use, and suddenly we don't know how they're connected, we don't know why they're connected, we don't know why it is that when we plug in our camera to our laptop, 2 days later we get an email from Facebook saying, hey, you have new photos, would you like to upload them? We don't really know how those things work. And when we talk about the way the internet works, actually many basic user problems is just what just happened to the things I did and why are they now connected? And one of the problems when you're looking specifically at data around activists is it's not just the data that's actually moved around the internet, it's also the data all around them. So it's the credit cards they use, it's the phone calls they make, it's the flights they book, it's the bank transfers they make, and we get kind of hooked on this, what's going on the internet, what's the problem with the internet, but I think we have to look at this data question in a much more serious way. And this data is actually not just in the hands of governments, but very much in the hands of the companies. And these companies don't always have hold of this data on an ongoing basis as well.
We get the impression that most of the things that we use are designed by default to do the wrong thing. So basically, you have to be this very smart person that change all the settings just to be sure that it's doing what makes sense. While most of the technology we buy is actually doing things that occasionally look like very dodgy, like why WhatsApp uploads your phone book to the database, why most of the protocols we use are not encrypted, why our email today has not encryption by default. I just don't understand it. And you don't understand why I can close a letter. I can go to the post box and close a letter, and I can do that with email. All these engineers, all these companies, all these very smart people, and at the end we don't have the basic principle of confidentiality in the internet. Well, we don't have that. And if we don't answer that question, we cannot really address the problem. We want an open and secure internet. Open for whom? Secure against what?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that, and I would say also that what we need to work more strongly is on something that I think that you said, on transparency in the management of all of the data. Because sometimes the problem is that we don't even know what is the people who has our data is going to do with our data. And when I say the people that has our data, I'm not saying just the private sector. I'm saying the governments as well.
Sometimes they don't even know what they want to do with our data. They're just collecting the data, just in case. I mean, honestly, all these companies that was mentioned there that collecting personal data, they collect personal data because eventually they can figure out to make money out of it. I mean, not always even they can answer you the question. What are you going to do with all this data? We don't know yet. We just collect it.
Well, it is essentially a question of governance. Whether you as an activist are pursued, or whether society is vulnerable to all sorts of interferences, is essentially a question of good governance. And we must realize that in the cyber dynamics, and also in your question, sir, that was evidenced, there is a discrepancy between the development of the rule of law and the rules of the game and the speed of technological change. The technical capability outpaces our ability to regulate that as we do it in all other walks of life. I mean, freedom of speech, for instance, is when before the internet, Stalin was once accused that the Soviet Union would be a dictatorship, and he said, well, what do you mean a dictatorship? Look at our constitution, freedom of speech, for instance. It's included here, it's in the constitution. Okay, freedom after speech is a different matter, but the problem exists forever. The question is how we deal with it in the context of cyber. And there the most striking thing is that democracies or states are outpaced by the technology, also by the fact that part of the responsibility is with the private sector in an unregulated way. What's the responsibility of the state? What is of the internet providers? What of parliamentary control over whatever. All of this is aggravated if we go to the global south, who looks to me severely endangered to be a loser at several levels. First, as a victim of cyber problematics at large, but also because it was developed without the global south having a voice in the formulating of the rules of the game. And I think we should focus considerably not only on the protection of the individual, but of global society at large. And I believe it is necessary to offer concrete steps to the governments in the south, or to governments less advanced than the 10 number one countries in cyber, to go in a direction of manifesting and impacting with their views. For
but
instance,
since you mentioned those concrete steps,
yeah.
we have somebody from the Global South who may be able to say what those concrete steps are. Maroon, in your specific context, do you see concrete support?
Yes, I just wanted to agree with Arturo, because actually in the beginning there were no security awareness concerning, let's say, on online transactions and communication.
Where is this right now? Which country?
No, I just want to...
In general?
In general.
Okay.
He just pitched the idea of why emails are not encrypted by default, let's say. So it's just because, for the same reason that the HTTP requests are not encrypted by default, and you have to execute a certain small act, let's say, to make your traffic encrypted or not. Actually, I must also agree on this, that sometimes you need to hack those small stuff in order to make your emails to become encrypted or not. Actually, it can be on three phases, and I don't know if it's a technical issue. My answer will be technical on this point, but I will not dig into the technicalities of this issue, because it has several phases. You have the client phase, you have the user phase, and you have the email servers communicating with each other. So in the end, I guess the security awareness should be raised, especially on the user level, because most of times the governments do not give some recommendations as global recommendations for users how to be private online and how.
But couldn't that be more simple? Why isn't all email encrypted by default? Wouldn't that just be the most straightforward way if most large email providers just provided encryption by default?
Actually, I must not agree on everything, because some emails are encrypted by default, because on some clients, when you configure your email for the first time, it is encrypted by default.
Is that the majority? Is that
it's
some?
Not, of course, it's not the majority. As I said, you have the user level, it can be work alone. You have the client level, it can work alone also, and you have the communication between the mail servers. So but the problem is that the security awareness, that government do not always raise security awareness on the users level in order to be private online and preserve the several security services, was it the privacy, confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
I believe we have a quick question over here, please.
As for concrete proposals, a couple of days ago, a couple of activist groups, including Electronic Frontier Foundation, Bits for Freedom, came up with this proposal, Necessary and Proportionate.net, which is a list of recommendations for ethical surveillance, for want of a better word. I don't know if the panel has any specific feedback on this issue. It includes user notification, includes transparency. it also prohibits others from doing this. So would this list be enough? Thanks.
I would like to say that yes, user notification and transparency, I think that are essentials. But going back to the email encrypted by default, I agree with that. But it's also something related to the user's demand. So the more knowledge the user have about what's going on, the more demand will be to have encrypted communication. And if the demand is too high, the users could select between different companies that are doing that in a default way. So I would like to add here to this discussion the issue related to education of the user and to spread the knowledge about what's going on in the net in terms of cybersecurity, because demanding the private sector to have a specific way to use the net could be very, very powerful, and the private sector could react to that and change the way that they are doing business as well.
And I mean, capacity building is one of the issues, one second, that keeps coming up all the time. But we did also have a question, and it would be very kind if...
I mean, I think that's a good start. I mean, I've still recommend this as a good start. Only one comment about that. I mean, since that we start to classify the world, like when I airline, you have the economy plus, and the business people. And basically you have, in the new classification, we have the freedom fighters, the terrorists, the activists, and the business people. So we end up with this interesting situation where it seems to be that to be an activist is something different to being a citizen. And I think that we have to, not because you have mentioned that word, that is the word we use, I use that word, is that we have to start to stop talking about activists. I'm a citizen, I'm not an activist. You said I'm an activist, why? Because I'm not a citizen, I'm a citizen. That I'm active in this topic is because I have choose this topic. You know, my mother chooses another topic. I mean, she likes gardening, and she's very active being a gardener. So I believe that by just categorizing people that make demands that are basic human citizen rights, you put citizen there, we are just basically putting those concepts like are special. Like there's only 4 types of people: the people that need to be surveyed, then the mass, and then you have the criminals, and then you have the businesses, and suddenly the activists. I think that we have to start to talk about clearly, you know, do we want to have privacy for all? Or not? And if the answer is we're willing to take those risks, we want to make a better internet. We have to make a better place. We're willing to take those risks for a much open society? Yes or no? There is a risk. Of course there is a risk. Or do we want to have a camera, you know, stuck in our bags every day? And so I try to avoid the idea of the activists because it's a new term, has been coined now to classify the new hippies somehow. You know?
I'm just wondering if you feel that answered your question in any way. But
I think that's about terminology, but maybe about points in the actual list of suggestions. Is it sufficient? Are there more? For example, encryption. I use encryption. It is completely impossible to hack it, as far as I know. But the really weak point, and when I talk with activists, is that social engineering always gets to them in the end. So
I think what is not mentioned in that list is if no matter what technology you use, if it's not mass adopted, you will be the strange person. And it's not about just that. We need that everyone understands that privacy, that encryption is a default. We need all to understand that. We all put the belt in the car. We all drive at 90 kilometers per hour. We all do the same things because safety for all. We don't have a bunch of people that put the belt and other people that do that. You know, if we have safety for all, encryption for all, it's a simplification, but you know, so you can make a list of recommendations, but I'm afraid that when you make that list of recommendations, you're going to end up with the criminals and the activists adopting them, and then the rest of the people won't care. So we had to make the default happen.
Yeah.
So, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just because it's directly linked. I think that when we look at the question of how do you change the behavior of users or how do you get them to adopt new practices, we often end up looking at other paradigms, and the seatbelt safety one I think is one that's used very often is, we all used to drive cars without a seatbelt, and then we discovered that was kind of dangerous, and it took a very long time, and in some places, even despite campaigns, people still don't wear them. On the other hand, when we talk about this differentiation with activists, I think it's absolutely right that they should be treated the same way. But when we try to protect activists and many other types of groups, what we're doing is essentially dealing with a racing car driver, because what they're doing is doing what everybody else does, driving the car down the road and trying to get from A to B and so on, but they're also like stress testing at high speed. So when we try to protect activists, although we shouldn't differentiate from them because that makes them special or the new hippies or whatever, I think at the same time we have to be realistic about the fact that we're trying to deal with somebody who needs like a helmet and a special outfit and maybe a harness. And I think this is kind of a different way of seeing it, without flagging them. So without, and I think this is absolutely right, which is, things like encryption, whatever, it needs to be used by everybody so that you can't see the racing car driver going down the middle of the lane. Sorry to stretch the metaphor, but here's the
I believe we have another question at the front.
Thank you. I fully agree with Arturo, but don't you think that it is a part of the deal? We get a lot of services like Gmail or Facebook for free, absolutely. And when you kind of compare with the letter envelope, we buy a stamp every time when we send a letter. But this time, we kind of doing it automatically and not thinking that someone is providing huge services. There are huge servers somewhere in California, etc., which are always care about kind of that is everything working and functioning. So do you think that maybe we have to kind of accept the situation that we use these services and for that we give up our security or something privacy? And if you don't like it, so don't register yourself at Facebook, for instance, and make friends as we used to do like 10 years ago without these social networks, etc.
I basically think that if we agree that privacy is a human right, and I think someone has already agreed then it's not a choice of Gmail to make the choice if to be good at that. I mean, if we agree what is a good practice, it's not that people say, well, listen, this company is not doing good things, so it's your choice, it's free. No, that choice will not be available, and that's why we have these fantastic policymakers saying, don't do that. That's why we have data protection people saying, fine, you don't do that. So I don't think that people have to be presented with this choice. Free services and we monitor you, and paid services and we don't monitor you. Monitoring is wrong.
No, why not to pay like $10 a month for Gmail and then like everything you can delete, etc. I think it's wise.
I don't want to pay for a right.
But then use
I believe we have another question at the back.
Because we're going to have two types of societies, right? We're going to have people that can afford privacy and the people that can't. And how the world we live in and how it's distributed, I'm afraid that most of the people cannot afford to eat. So privacy definitely is not going to fit in the first 10 bullets of their shopping list.
Okay, hi. I'm Linus. I'm from a Swedish digital rights organization called DFRI. I also work for Tor. My question is very, very simple. I'm going to put it as a claim, and the question is there anyone on the panel who does not agree with this claim? We are now, okay, so background. In the 90s, we had the crypto wars. It was impossible to export crypto because crypto was dangerous, right? Because someone could hide using crypto. So there were export regulations from all of the Western states, or all the states, I guess, for exporting crypto. That is the reason for why we don't have email encrypted by default today, by the way. So the effects of this goes way back, or goes a long way. So my statement now, and I would like to see if there's someone who doesn't agree with me, is do we today have the privacy wars as we had the crypto wars in the 90s?
What do you think, Maroon?
Well, yes, actually, I consider that there's. Actually, I'm gonna answer. I'm not sure if I'm gonna answer your question like this, but I'm gonna talk about the future of internet. So I'm not gonna pass over the current state.
So there's no one disagreeing with me on the
Eduardo?
Yeah.
Do you disagree?
I don't think so, but I would say something that is close related to that, and it is related to the concept of privacy that we are using now. And maybe this is too provocative, but perhaps we need to start thinking that the concept of privacy is changing. It's changing because of the technology. And I understand when you say don't want to pay for any right, but this is correct after you have a clear idea on the concept of the right you are defending. So I am saying that because it's a wonderful example. It's not, my idea, but property rights changed because of the planes. Many years ago, property rights involved the property of the land all the way down, all the way up. When planes start, flying over my land, some people say this is trespassing. They are trying to trespass, or they are affecting my property.
Eduardo,
and some people say the idea, the concept of property changed. My point is it not changing the concept of privacy today? Is it not a different concept that we use in the past? This is a question. I don't have a good answer for that. But if it is changing, maybe it is also changing the way that we can, think about the internet. I don't know.
But we have a question from a panelist now, so maybe
I don't think the concept has changed. And according about if this is the privacy word, is your question, I think it's definitely a war going on for privacy. And I think that it's about status quo, right? When someone basically said we cannot put encryption because some people can do this and that, it was about status quo. The people in power feel that these technologies can change them, that someone else will take their seats. And in this case, privacy will have, privacy by default, we have by definition an amazing impact on how we communicate. It will have an amazing impact, of how we empower people to participate in democracy. We have the possibility to participate without being killed or tortured, for example. So of course, this will change the status quo of the world. There are people that prefer to know what is happening in every corner because that allows them to preserve their positions. So yes, I think we are in the privacy world, and I don't think it has changed so much. We have seen this. It's been going forever. Right, from the first phone calls, from the DES encryption, from the first chips that were built, triple DES word, just to make something encryption. So it's been all over the place. And now we have a 20 years later, we are discussing if we should have secure HTTPS. It's quite pathetic, actually, our progress in this matter.
I'm Mohammed Taraki from the Jordan Open Source Association. My comment was basically, I just wanted to add to what Lenin said. Do you guys agree that the internet is, the internet is largely broken in some ways, in the way it's designed, and do you agree that people should take more people should be interested in seeing how we can fix the parts of the internet that affect our privacy, that affect our freedom of speech? I know it's a huge undertaking, but as an example, we were able to transition from IPv4 to IPv6, and that doesn't mean we can't change stuff such as protocols such as email or HTTP and improve on them.
But maybe, sorry to insist with that, because we are talking about privacy. So everybody thinks that the concept of privacy today is the same of the concept of privacy 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It didn't evolve. It is the same, the concept of privacy, all around the world. So, I would like to be careful when we are saying that we need to protect privacy and to create regulations or even the code, technology to protect privacy. If we don't have clear, ideas about what we are protecting. I understand that, we need to support some values. You talk about values, privacy is a value, but what we are talking about? Maybe this is a question for everybody.
I realize, but it's a very broad question, and it's difficult to ask the audience. But maybe we can go for a show of hands. Who believes that the concept of privacy has changed? Raise your hands. Okay, that's about, I'd say, more than half of the audience. Thank you. Steph, would you feel able to answer the question whether the internet is broken?
Oh, wow. Thanks, Ben.
Sorry, it seemed like a tough one, so I thought you'd be good for it.
I think it's it's an interesting question. I think many of the discussions here are really sliced. There tends to be, it's a governance problem, it's a technical problem, whatever. I think that we need to look at these things on multiple levels. There are things that need fixing about the architecture and about the technologies. There are things the companies need to do, and there are checks and balances that need to be put in place to stop them from behaving in particular ways. And just to this lady's point earlier, consumers should vote with their feet. However, there are monopolies. And there are information monopolies. Facebook, for example, has an information monopoly that will not be broken. Governments don't have the ability to make them open up their standards, and they should. So, this level we need to work as well. And then, again, from the user point of view, we can't wait for governments to bring in policies because, frankly, they're mostly discussed here, and it takes many years for them to hit users. And at the same time, companies won't change their activities because it's not in the consumer interest or the mass consumer interest to do so. And then we need technologists to step in and help this problem. And not only from a technical perspective, we need technology activists, meaning this kind of hybrid form. And this is where I take offense to the idea that people in the Global South are victims. Many of my friends in the Global South who are tech activists are extremely capable of fixing some of these problems at the local level. And that's often with not many resources, and it's because it can be a more artful form of response. You know, maybe small steps, small groups of people doing small things, but they can be really important, especially in this kind of space. I don't know if that answered your question.
I don't think the internet is broken. It's that we don't want to fix it at all. And I think that, you know, that today is more cost effective to do evil than to do good. And when you are willing to make more money doing the bad things and doing the good things for a company, for a hosting provider, for a user, in all levels, you know, I believe that there is no penalties and there is no mechanism in place that makes doing the bad things a very expensive business. And if we allow bad behavior to be cheap, then there's no way we can compete the good people. The good people, we have to provide encryption, privacy, we have to provide routers that do encryption, tunnels, we have to do all these things. While the other people are more interested in speed, bandwidth, routing at all packets per second, because this is really what brings business in. So I think that there is not an economy. I think what real thing is broken is the economy of the internet, or the economy at large. I think that the best part of the internet is the people. And I don't think that's broken. I think that's fantastic. And this is actually really what makes the internet really a fun place to be. And I think that's the people are really there saying, listen, you know, we want to make something with this thing, while you have these other forces saying we want to make money out of you. And I think this balance has to be addressed. I mean, like, free services models based on advertisement is not really the solution for a freedom of the internet. I don't believe so.
We have another question here at the front.
Yes, thank you. Maybe it's more of a comment. My name is Rikke. I'm from the Danish Human Rights Institute. I think this dichotomy between privacy and openness is really a false one. On a personal level, all of us handle openness and privacy ongoing in a number of different contexts. And if we look at it from a human rights perspective, the right to privacy is an individual right. So it's the protection of an individual against those more powerful, the state or a company. Whereas openness is a norm that we can demand from systems of power, whether it be the state or a company. So they are, I mean, they are supplementing each other and they are at fundamental different levels, and I don't think they contradict. And with regard to Facebook, I think what we are in at the moment is a period of transition and of implementation challenges, so to speak. To my mind, I mean, Facebook should, of course, comply with data protection norms and standards. Many people would agree to that. You have European data protection agencies that would claim that. You have the settlement from the Federal Communications Commission in the US that went over Facebook's practices a year and a half ago and addressed a number of privacy issues where they basically say you have to comply with this and that and this and that, or you will be fined on a number of different issues. But of course, the really tricky point at this moment is to enforce it, to make Facebook live up to basic data protection principles that we can derive from human rights law, that we can derive from OECD guidelines, and a number of other statements or the new initiatives that you mentioned. So, I mean, there are many data protection norms out there, and there is also amongst many groups a general agreement that a private service such as Facebook or any of the other platforms should respect these norms. And there are also a lot of research and surveys that shows that users still care. So it's also important to users, actually. So what we have at the moment, I think, is a period of transition where the tricky thing is to make this a reality in these platforms. We have the norms, we have the expectations, we have the value of privacy that is still valued by and large by most people that you ask about these issues. And then we have some myth like the one that because people share on Facebook, they don't value privacy. I mean, I think that's a complete wrong way to put it. you can easily decide to share tons of information and still value your privacy. There is no contradiction there to me. Privacy is about you having the decision in your own hands.
But this was not the proposition that was made. We simply had a suggestion here that privacy had changed as a concept in the last 100 years, at which a certain amount of people raised their hands. But if you'd like to ask a question to the panel, then that would be...
Okay, well, in response to that, I think that all human rights are formulated at such a general level, including the right to privacy. So, of course, the concrete application of these norms change over time, and also the right to privacy. So, all the issues we are discussing here in terms of data protection and online privacy, obviously, no one was thinking of when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was formulated. So, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I like what you said in terms of that the companies should respect the norms. So this sounds good and correct, but what are the norms? This is the question in our era now, because you said, I mean, in terms of privacy and data protection, you have different rules all around the world. You just mentioned the FCC rules and you just mentioned the European rules, but it could happen that you could have more rules in other regions. The world is not just US and Europe. So what if we start having rules that are in some way in contradiction? Are we requesting to the private sector to respect all the rules all around the world, even if they are in contradiction? So I don't know how we are going to, articulate this what I see a problem, unless we have a global agreement that I'm not sure that we can have about what those norms should be. Is that clear what I'm saying? So, because in some way it could, prevent innovation if we are requesting the private sector to respect the rules of all around the world, which is okay and sounds good, but what if the rules are in contradiction? They should do differently. I don't know.
If I may build on that, I fully share the view from our participant from Denmark that because things are complicated, they shouldn't be dealt differently than other things. The question is how, and you raised that issue. How can we regulate in a way that is acceptable to all of us the internet? And that is not so easy to answer. There is the option one, this great international treaty with the United States, Russia, China, and the last atoll in the Pacific signing up on all of these things, the ITU solution. That will not work. What then? Option two is that one would have soft international law arrangements that goes in the direction you point. That is, countries that feel that the issue should be addressed in this way or that way, coalesce together and agree to a soft international law agreement that is partial, around which consensus may be able to build. And in that context, I feel it would be extremely useful if the South would be able to have its voice developed, because currently it doesn't have one. There is unrest or there is dissatisfaction, but what do we actually want? How do we want to change the system? There is the problem of the private sector. Code of conduct may be a way to address this issue. Industry agreed, but governments influenced, or civil society influenced rules of behaviors that can be imposed by the industry itself, so that its reluctance is less, but that can be stiffened and have a way forward. But it seems to me perfectly obvious to come back to a point which I felt is important. You said activists shouldn't be treated differently. Of course not. Every human being has the right to be treated exactly the same way. And we need to protect not so much the activists, because they are computer cognoscenti in this context, but the pacifists, those who have no clue what is happening to them. I mean, the large majority of people. And the trick is to find out how to do so. There are simple things that are needed. One thing is, for instance, this conference, bringing people from 93 countries together to debate an issue which is actually of relevance and of urgency. Another step might be to create an international observatory on just reporting in a neutral way what's going on. I mean, who's meeting where, on what initiative is being conducted, by whom, just to have an overview. Because I don't know how you are, but I'm overwhelmed by what's going on. I have long given up to have even a clue what initiatives are taken by the European Union, by the ITU, or by NATO, by God knows whom. So a third area is to have an institutional focal point where people can meet, particularly from the global south that are deprived of that capabilities and don't have the regular G20 meetings or other institutional links, where people can exchange views on a permanent basis and help to develop a structured response. The point I mean to make is it's clear that we are all concerned. Now what? What needs to be done? I think we should devote also a few minutes to that issue.
For sure. There's first a question from the audience over here, but just to wrap up that general, we're all coming through different capacity building issues, and I think it's very important to look at different areas where more capacity is necessary, both with institutional arrangements, information, and other different steps. Please.
I hear that people are concerned about how we could regulate this space, this new complicated space nowadays, because we have contradictions. We have had these contradictions all the time. We have contradictions between freedom of speech and other things. I mean, this is not a new problem. I don't think that we should focus on the problems. And you know, someone mentioned that, oh, how could we do this globally? Could we actually enforce this in all these countries where the internet can reach, or whatever the question is? That is not the right question. Our Danish friend here, she reminded us that we have norms, and you could, if you want text, you could look at the human rights, human rights as posed by the UN. We have privacy in there. There's something called Article 18. It says that you have the right to communicate without people listening into you, and we do not value that right enough today. And I think it's partly because this new technology that we are so excited about, but also afraid of, is because that we do not understand how much data we give other people, or how much we expose ourselves if we are not technical experts today. We do not know that it's not only our Facebook updates that actually reveal stuff about us. When I use my phone here, I actually reveal that I'm in Stockholm and I'm at this point. When I move around, I reveal to lots of people, ISPs and all the service providers that I'm using in here, that I'm moving around. This is geolocation data that most people do not understand, that they are giving this information all the time. And this is just one out of many things that you are revealing to lots of people. And if we don't start valuing privacy, I don't have a question actually. Okay. I have a statement, and I would like, okay, I can pose it as a question, of course.
It would be helpful in the context of a debate where we exchange views. I think that was the idea of this
so
workshop.
The gentleman who was very worried about how we could do this on the internet. How is this different from other problem that we have that is not internet related? Thank you.
Okay, I have a comment.
Please.
Actually, it's both people's problem. It's a private part, which let's say Facebook, Gmail, and the users who are using it. The first thing that everything should be detailed in a certain, let's say, privacy policy that everybody checks without reading. So I guess it's the problem comes from both of us. The private sector or private companies should specify in details what they are doing, and the user should read. If they do not agree with it, they shouldn't agree and never sign up. And so it's also a part of the security awareness that is, I guess, it's the root of all evil in this issue.
The root of all evils are privacy policies.
Yes.
That's a useful take-home for sure. Please, you have a question over here.
Yeah, and is this on? Okay. And actually, the funny thing is that you were speaking of code of conduct, ethics, and such. I remember when Google started, there was this sentence, "Don't be evil," and I think it was a largely reply to Microsoft. And now we haven't heard this "don't be evil" in a long time. So do you think this reflects something? Like, what's your take on that? Like,
does it reflect something?
Well, it reflects that that the market economy is thriving, right? The thing, and not the human economy.
But
Google, it was a marketing point
yeah.
for them. Don't be evil. Now it's no longer.
Now it's become a slightly embarrassing line for them that they have to defend. Yeah, exactly. Again, yeah. I mean, Google in particular are interesting because I think they've tried very hard. I'm not going to defend them, by the way. But I think they've tried very hard to engage civil society. I think the problem is that we need to be realistic about the fact that they're a company. So, for example, my organization produces training materials, and when we produce training materials and put them out for civil society, and some of them highlighted Google Maps and said you should use Google Maps, and this is how you use them, and so on. I was sitting next to somebody from Google who does the promotion of this kind of materials, and they said to me, we know your book, but we can't use it on our website, we can't promote it. And we said, why? It's kind of telling people how to use Google Maps. And they said, yeah, but you're critical of us in your other work on digital security and privacy. And so whilst they're trying to engage civil society and they're trying to talk with civil society and so on, at the end of the day, they're a large company who have very specific ways of working, and even though they want to work with NGOs, they don't want NGOs to be critical of them, and this is a line that they have to defend over and over again, I think.
Just briefly, before we go to the next question, is there anybody in the room from Google who would like to respond to that? Anybody? Anywhere?
That was lucky.
That's a shame. I just saw two of them, but they somehow left the room. There's a question on Twitter, and then over here.
Yeah, a question from Twitter is, I mean, if we can't trust governments because they want our data, and we can't trust companies because they want our data. Who can we trust then? Is there anyone left to trust?
It's a tough question to the panel.
Can
Anybody
I
feel
just jump
confident
in
answering
I
that?
just want to pick up on a couple of different threads, which kind of maybe links to that. I think this point about being in transition is really important, and I think it directly links to the data question. I think there are things in place that, and there are not only that, but steps in place in terms of ways to enforce this as well, and monitoring of that. But I think this key point about being transition is that people are, and I think all users, not just high risk users like activists, my view is that they're really, really nervous about this right now, and this is the kind of question we get. And commenting on also what Linus was saying about, we're walking around, we're giving out data all the time, we don't even understand where it's going. We've been working in capacity building for 10 years directly with my organization. I've never seen such an amazing response to a project as one we launched last year called Me and My Shadow, which is looking at digital traces. And what it tries to do is explains what your digital shadow is, who you're giving data away to, who you can trust with your data, what the decisions you make, and so on. And the stunning thing for us has been the incredible uptake of just that very small idea. The project's not even great or anything, but just the idea of talking about Me and My Shadow, talking about digital traces and helping people understand them for awareness-raising purposes is really necessary. And people are completely confused. And this is a time for policy to be put in place, but it's also a time for people to act, both on the campaigning side and also on helping people understand these issues. And they don't even have to be high-risk activists to do that. Most individuals have a concern with these issues, I think.
I believe we have a question at the front from Russia, or not quite.
Thank you. My question is maybe a kind of follow-up to the Twitter question. And this comes from sort of a citizen organizing point of view. Because I think more or less everyone's on the same page about the fact that there's serious issues that are affect everyone, not just activists, but citizens. And they're understood by too few people, which is why we need awareness raising and campaigning. And there's complexity that makes this very hard in both the technology and in the processes that surround this technology. It's very hard to understand what our computers are doing, and it's also very hard to understand what our institutions are doing. And therefore, maybe my question is mostly to Stephanie, because kind of for me, if I can't trust, kind of at this point where I can't trust governments and I can't trust companies, it's sort of tactical tech is one of the things that I trust.
You never knew we'd be there.
It's okay, you can trust some of our other panelists as well, they're all quite trustworthy.
I'm really happy to hear that, but anyways, my problem with this is that kind of awareness raising needs to have a goal. Like if you want citizens to get active and sort of do something about something, we need to define what it is that we're doing. And at this point, we have three things that we could be doing. One thing is that we could organize as citizens and try to affect our country privacy laws, which is kind of futile, especially if we're not US citizens, because, you know, who cares what, for example, in my case, the Finnish privacy laws are. They don't really change anything. So even if I got really lucky and managed to do something there, it will not change anything. We could act as consumers, but that's really, really limited. We could maybe through campaigning, like, get at one issue in one company, but not any company. Just some of the companies will respond, and even then it will be really limited. And, you know, evil stuff develops faster than all of this good stuff that we could, as consumers, change. And then the third thing is that I can affect my own tech. I can learn about stuff. I can get really absorbed in how to protect myself, and then it's just a really individualist, do-it-yourself position that doesn't change anything again. And this long introduction is kind of like, you know what, like, as much as I love tactical tech, I don't really understand always what is it that we should, or that you should try and achieve. Like, what's the goal? Which one of these three, or is there something else that we can, as citizens, change?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for putting it in terms of my organization, but of course there are many, many other colleagues and many other groups working in a similar way. But I think you just gave 3 possible solutions, you know, and I would say we need to do all of them. I think the problem is big enough and widespread enough that we need to do all of them. And I think the mistake we've perhaps made is that, especially because you're looking at user-end questions, you know, can we organize, can we actually protect our own technology, should we be better informed, and so on. I think we need to do all those things, but the other thing we need to do is realize that it's a long-haul problem. I think a lot of the funding into this space has come thinking, okay, I fund this training, I solve the problem. I fund this guide, I solve the problem. And it's actually not the problem at all. And what needs to change, the bad news is, having done this for 10 years, the bad news is what needs to change is, you know, on such a large and fundamental level, and it's long-term investment. There is no short answer, and there needs to be a better connection between the tool developers, between the people who are doing the campaigning, and between the people who are doing the training, and that needs to tie into the policy work too. And this is where we are. I think we're at a stage where, realistically, we need to take responsibility and develop the field forward, you know, in collaboration with each other. And I think we are making tiny successes, and I do think country by country some of these campaigns do work, but they need to all be interlinked, and they need to start moving together. Otherwise, you're not going to see any fundamental change.
Yeah, I would like to address actually the 3 questions, because they are close related. The first question was about the motto, the Google motto, don't make evil, or don't do evil, and the second question is about trust. I think that the motto, the Google motto, and I'm not trying to speak on behalf of Google, but I think that motto could be seen as a marketing motto, but it has a message, which is, okay guys, the governments are the ones who are doing evil. The governments are not going to rule us, and we are not going to do evil. I think that is the underlying, the meta message of that motto. And so the consequence is, trust us. But people, as the Twitter question said, the people are not, don't trust in the governments and don't trust in the companies now, in the private sector. The question is why? There are very good reasons why people don't trust in governments, and there are very good reasons why people don't trust in companies. Things about the Yahoo case, about the Chinese activists. So there are good reasons why people are skeptical about the governments and the private sector. So what should we do? And now I'm going to my third point, and it's something that I said before. I think that we need to add to this equation the thing of education and capacity building of the civil society, which is really important for people to understand what's going on and to defend themselves and to request some changes, and also transparency, because in a lot of situations, people don't trust because they don't know. And this is something that is very common. If I don't know what the companies or the government is doing with the data, there are a lot of good reasons why I'm not going to trust in them. So I would, you know, add to this problem. Then in terms of policies, in terms of doing something, that we need to work more on education and transparency.
You have a question over here, please.
Yeah, let me follow up the point that she made about what do we need to do. I think when we look at the challenges that Bill Gates has faced globally in terms of the global health crisis, I think we need to learn some lessons from that, because it's a complex problem that involves private groups and government. And we need to do a better job of what Bill Gates said was, we need to identify what we care about and we need to measure it. Mm-hmm. And so I would suggest to you that when we talk about standards, yeah, there's some standards out there, there's some best practices, but I think this group, this conference, needs to identify what is it we care about and what do we need to do about it. And we need to identify, here are the principles that we believe are fundamental, building on a number of other things, principles that are fundamental. We need to identify what we want to accomplish in the next year. So when we come back here a year from now, we don't just sit around and talk the same talk we've always had. We sit around and say, where was progress made? What have we accomplished? What do we need to do next? I do think government could help, but in a different way than they normally help. I think government can help by saying, let's be a convener. Let's bring together a lot of these groups to identify what are the principles and best practices we need to follow. And let us step up and say, these are what they are. And then we can compare, use the data that Bill Gates talks about is Google complying? Are other people complying? Are governments being transparent? These are the principles. But unless we do this, we're just going to keep coming back and talking the same talk over and over again.
I think that's a great question. So to push that actually directly to all 5 of the panelists, because I think it's very important. If there's one thing that for next year, CIF 2014, assuming you're sitting on the same panel, that you'd like to say that has been achieved to create a more secure internet, what would that be? Maroon, please.
Okay.
One thing.
First, I'm going to think about it. So, one of the main things that should be the main point will be it's related to the private companies that are, let's say, the global companies, so Facebook, YouTube, all those stuff. That users should notify them that they are not happy of what they are doing, fully happy. So some certain of campaigns should be communicated with them in order to see, and the next year we will see if we had a certain response with them or not. That might be the first point.
Please, one thing.
Well, I feel that I like very much in what you say that where is the beef? What do we do? I feel there is a multiple action needed. At the NGO level, I feel there is indeed your principles enriched perhaps or changed or whatever, but the NGO community needs to define what it wants. What it wants from governments, what it wants from the internet providers, and so on. Secondly, CEDA and people like me, who is running a security sector governance program with 61 countries behind. We need to find out ways and means how to support the weakest, namely the global south. That doesn't mean that the Swedish or Swiss parliament or others are fully capable of addressing the issue, but we need to come up with remedies for those that are the weakest link in the chain, the next billion.
Fantastic.
Thirdly, we need to...
That's great. 2 things, right? The 2 key things. Civil society finds out what they want, and they get support from it from CEDA and others. Sounds great. Steph?
No, I have to be short, yeah. I think I'd like to see a stepping up of the response and a coordination. I like the topic mainstreaming of capacity building. We never got to that. So I say one thing, which is about mainstreaming, which is that it kind of terrifies me on the other hand, because actually this is a really complex issue, and I worry if it gets folded into lots and lots of other issues that it becomes dealt with not necessarily in the right way. And just the last point there, I think that next year I'd like to see less double standards. I think there's too much discussion about the South is different as the weak and the victims and so on. I think it's wrong. I think that these are issues of control for all countries and for all citizens, and I'd like to see that leveled out in the discussion.
Fantastic. Please, Arturo.
I want to find a button in the major operators that says I want to delete all my traces.
Very straightforward.
Well, I'm insisting in transparency, and particularly having in mind the new initiatives coming from Google or Twitter, for example, so pushing more companies to do these kind of things and to involve all the business sector in initiatives like the Global Network Initiative to do these kind of things that I think that could help us as users.
Fantastic. It's going to be a great CIF 2014, you can imagine. Joe, you had a question back there.
I had a comment, if I may. or a response to another comment. The lady from Finland said that what can we do as Finnish citizens? What impact will we have on changing if we change Finnish law? The European Union is in the process of updating its data protection package, and the current package has been the world-leading model of privacy. It's the only world-leading model on privacy, and we're currently in Brussels. We're faced with the biggest lobbying campaign that I think the world has ever seen. Fear, uncertainty, doubt, misinformation, downright lies. And once the European framework has been destroyed by the current lobbying attack, there won't be a global model anymore. And I would urge every European in the room to please visit privacycampaign.eu and nakedcitizens.eu and do everything you can to contact your European parliamentarians and tell them that we do care about our fundamental rights, and they should care that there's an election in May 2014 while they're destroying our fundamental rights. Thank you.
Do they care about that we care about? Or they care about the lobbyists?
At the moment, they care about the lobbyists. In 2014, we decide whether they get re-elected or not. So I think we have more leverage now than we normally have. But at the moment, there's no outcry. At the moment, we have amendments attacking every single core element of the regulation and destroying it. And at the moment, there's a majority to basically eliminate every protection that currently exists in the current package. If they realize that we're watching and they realize that how we vote next year is going to be decided by whether they listen to us or they listen to the US government and US companies, we've got more leverage now than normal. But if we stay silent, then the lobbies will win.
How much money has the lobbies?
I think we can.
It is the biggest. I've been in Brussels since 1997. It is the biggest campaign I have ever seen.
Please, we have a few more questions and we're almost out of time. I don't want to cut anybody else off.
Sure.
Please.
Practically speaking, when I live in a country like Sweden, I tend to rely on the government to ensure that businesses don't prey on me. When I live in another country where the government preys on its citizens, I tend to rely on Google, on Tor, on encryption technologies to make sure that the government doesn't prey on me. So my biggest fear, and this is maybe a practical suggestion, is like you're suggesting here, that we should make sure that government and business never collude, because then there is this alliance that we as citizens can never overcome. So I think this is maybe an underlying problem. And I think in the US it's also a big problem. And I think they're now focusing very much there when you go to Personal Democracy Forum and so on about this grassroots strikers and so on. So this may be an underlying problem that isn't even internet or technology based, but which is really important to this debate.
There's another question here at the front and then at the back.
Just a quick comment. Well, we've spoken about people giving away their privacy in exchange for entertainment, you know, signing up for Facebook and other stuff. But this, I have to say, I do not share this kind of trust in governments, even in relatively safe countries and democratic countries. I mean, I'll give you the example of Poland, which is a stable democracy and so on. We are very proud of that. Last year, it was revealed that various intelligence agencies have requested details, that is, the contents of text messages and billing data for over 2 million numbers, and that's in a country of 37 million inhabitants. I guess there might be 20 million mobile phones, and that gives you, well, that's something that, you know, I don't think there's 2 million criminals in Poland. Perhaps they all live in British Isles these days. But this is just to give you an example, and this is a relatively stable democracy. And I don't think that anyone signing up for a mobile network has consciously decided that yes, I want my text messages to be stored forever, and yes, I want my billing data. Yes, I want my text messages be handed over to whoever asks.
Maybe we should add it to the terms of service as a checkbox. And then
I'd
you
say
can
so.
opt out.
Actually, just sitting here, it came to me that this would be a good campaign point, actually.
Add it on. No, it could be helpful. Are there any further responses from the panel to that? Do you think that could? Okay, then we have one more question over here.
Hi, my name is Anna Karfelt from SIDA. We know that many authoritarian states have received training in cyber or against cybercrime in relation to anti-terrorism, and that may be, of course, be a legitimate sort of reason for many states also in developing countries. But what do you think that we as donors can do to ensure or help counteract that this knowledge is also used against these states' own citizens?
Please, Eduardo, and I think it's also a question for Teddy as well.
That's a great question, and I think that donors should do more on capacity building, particularly in grassroots, and particularly in regions of the world that are not receiving support to do these kind of educational programs that I'm receiving. You are from SIDA. SIDA is retiring, literally, from Latin America. I encourage your organization not to do that. I know that you have limited resources. I know that the world is complex. But what you are doing with Latin America is not good at all. In this thing and in other things as well. But you ask about these things. It's very important to continue the support of SIDA that had been done in the past for developing a very important human rights advocacy network and NGOs, and we need something similar now for this digital age.
Teddy, would you like to respond to that as well?
I think we need a larger energy effort to understand how these technologies work, how the bad people monitor the network, how they capture the data, who is providing the knowledge, who is helping them to do it. And we don't understand first how this is working, then we're going to propose alternatives. I think there's a lot of information, like, we know this is happening, but there's not much studies out there or attempts to figure out what equipment, what companies, what suppliers, and what countries are really involved in this type of job. I think that would be a good start.
Do you want to respond, Teddy, before we wrap up the panel? Because I think it's specifically related to security sector cooperation between different states, if I understood the question correctly, and how that can be more oriented towards human rights.
Well, there are two levels. So one level is the one we are discussing today, and SIDA is financing this. I think this is a worthwhile type of investment. One may ask oneself the question how one renders the exercise more sustainable by having in-between session activities or that sort of things, or what permanent features one wants to add to it. I mentioned the possibility of an observatory. The other dimension we haven't actually discussed is also one for donors, namely, while governments may prey on our privacy, there are certainly criminals out there that are after our money. And donors have a particular responsibility to help, I'm sorry, the Global South being vulnerable, to help with computer emergency response teams, with capability development, capacity building in that area, model laws, all sorts of activities that need to be done. Third dimension is that one encourages initiatives that lead to a genuine global debate, as opposed to monologue from Washington or other places, or Russia for that matter, so that the international community at large can have a more democratic and broader-based approach to these issues.
I mean, that's a good final response, but just to wrap it up, because you were saying that there's a lot more research that needs to be done in this area. There's plenty out there if you look at some of the work that Privacy International has done in this space. If you look at bugplanet.org, there's numerous other resources there where you can find that. It's already starting. But I think it's important, because you're asking specifically about these types of security corporations, to ensure that the human rights aspects are mainstreamed at all levels. And I think many of the panelists here can be extreme help in sort of ensuring that that happens. I'd love to follow up, but I'm sorry we have to close the panel because the colleagues from the Swedish Foreign Ministry who aren't with SIDA are already winking over. for now, I'd like to say thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, and thank you for your time.
Can I make an announcement? Sorry.